every day is different. I have a lot of flexibility in my role. A lot of being good at HR is common sense. You have to get comfortable making judgment calls when you don't have all the facts. To be successful, you need to be curious. You need to be thoughtful and consider all the facts. HR tells everyone what to do. And really our job is to help facilitate the conversation and get to an outcome. You can get all that information from that first phone call with the recruiter. That's how you know if somebody's really passionate about the company they work for, is when you talk to them. My name is Natalie Pepper, and I've been working in HR for 20 years now. My current role is a project manager. I'm leading a review of Los Alamos National Lab's compensation system. Really being a project leader, so defining what the project plan is going to look like, identifying the resources that we need to complete the project, and putting together a timeline, and that's really where we're at the moment. But we'll be kicking that off starting here in a couple weeks. And then my role at that point will really be meeting with managers and employees to understand what their roles are, and then to take that information and compare it to what we see in the market so we can determine what compensation should look like. I think for me, I'd say last 10 years, every day is different. So I don't usually have a typical day. I can say, okay, I'm gonna go in the morning and I'm gonna start out, and usually I check my email. I'll make sure that there isn't any emergency. But beyond that, there's not a typical day. Yesterday was full of a lot of meetings. Some days are like that. Yesterday I had multiple meetings, one specifically addressing the project and really working through what phase one of the project, what that scope was gonna look like, and then talking about phase two. So that was a teleconference with the individuals in New Mexico. And then I had 3 other meetings that day, just really working on different projects. One of them looking at related to compensation as well, but also one that was bigger, really looking at career enablement. So for an employee, how do you move in your career? If you start out as a recruiter, how could you become the senior recruiter and then maybe the manager? So really looking at talent and how you develop someone.
What kind of questions do you ask employees, those who are unhappy with their current job, to figure out what is it that they would like better?
Mm-hmm. So usually if I'm gonna have that conversation with an employee, I start out by asking them just to tell me about what they do. What is it about your job that you like? What is it that you wish was different? Really, like a lot of the why questions, and kind of probing in each time. Maybe asking them, okay, what interests you? Right, to figure out, do you prefer to be more actively engaged in talking? Maybe you want to be in sales or business development, or do you prefer to work more one-on-one? So just a series of questions like that to see what it is, and then based on my knowledge of what positions we might have, then I might go that next step of describing another position that we have in the organization that seems like it's a good fit, and really just the dialogue back and forth to try and figure out, maybe it's introducing them to something that they didn't realize was there, what another option that might be out there. So really it's just a lot of asking questions. I like the fact that it's not the same every day, and I have a lot of flexibility in my role in terms of being able to manage my own time and what that looks like, and make decisions. This compensation study would really be taking another step and looking at that as well, in terms of helping people understand how they move from one level to the next level, how they might be able to move from one job to another job that they might not even thought about. Also making sure that they're compensated properly, and at market, that we're competitive. So they, are able to have that fulfillment as well. Having hard conversations. A lot of times you've got to have that conversation with the manager where you might disagree with their position on something. And part of the role is to, as an HR professional, it's a balance between what's good for the organization and what's good for the employee. And so sometimes you got to have that hard conversation with a manager to let them know that maybe they're not right, or there's multiple ways to look at something and you've got to influence them. I think it's also hard to have that conversation with employees. If they're asking you for something that just can't happen, then you've got to find a way to help them understand why that can't happen. You want them to walk away feeling like they've been heard. So that can be a challenge sometimes, particularly just in the moment. I think, as do some of my peers, that a lot of being good at HR is common sense, which is not necessarily something you get in school. It tends to be something that you learn as you're going along. When people think about HR, they have a couple different reactions. They think, oh, HR is mean, or HR tells everyone what to do. And really, our job's to help facilitate the conversation and get to an outcome. At least that's how we've been practicing HR where I'm at, and really, helping drive an outcome, but not direct the outcome. People will say, well, HR fires people. HR doesn't. They don't make the decision. We make sure that it's the right decision for the organization, and the supporting information might be there. But and while we might participate, we're not usually, in general, usually the one doing it. So I think that was probably in my first long-term job that I had after undergrad. I was working at a call center in customer service. And so again, I was a supervisor. We hired a lot of people, so I did a lot of interviews. We had to train the individuals to be able to do that. There tends to be in a job like that a lot of employee issues. So you do a lot of counseling. You might be doing some terminations. And so I can remember at some point in there, someone said, "You're really good at that." I had a couple employee situations. I had one where, it was very interesting. I was doing this performance review, and when we got done, he goes, "Wow, I was afraid to come in here." He said, "But that was really good, and you really understand what I'm doing." And then I had somebody else that we fired, and had she been as professional in everything else she did when she got fired, she'd been a great employee. Because she had some good qualities, but she had done something that was a terminable offense. But she said, "That was the nicest I've ever been fired." So I kind of put those things together because I wasn't crazy with what I'm like, okay, maybe I can do HR. They had some stuff highlighted on my resume, right? The couple things they liked. One of it was around the recruiting and the fact that we had an IT support organization at the call center. So there was some technology component in there. They liked that piece of it. So really, tell me about what you do from an interviewing perspective. And then the other piece was around the performance management, just actually my role as a supervisor and what I had done with performance management and coaching. Having some business classes is a good idea. If you really want to help leadership figure out how they need to run their company and what's the best thing to do there, I think having a basic understanding of how a business makes money. So your finance classes, economics classes are a good idea. Statistics, because analytics in terms of really being able to provide data around predicting what your workforce is going to look like in 5 years. Do you have a lot of people that are going to retire? And how do you prepare for that? So I think that is important. HR Foundation is a good step in there as well. Most everyone that we've hired in our HR team has had at least an undergraduate or a graduate degree in HR. Well, I definitely think if you have the opportunity to be a part of a project team, then I think being part of that project team and being the one that might ask questions or challenge the team in terms of thinking differently. A lot of times when people go into a meeting or they go into a conversation, they might have some preconceived ideas in their head. And really, when you go in as an HR professional, you want to be neutral. You try not to have any preconceived notions one way or the other. If complaints come in, you don't want to say, okay, the person's guilty. You want to think of them as, I'm gathering information before I'm formulating an opinion. So I think that that's something that you can absolutely practice if you're a part of a project team. I think that sometimes you go in and it's like, okay, I've got this idea, and then you want to prove it. But really going in more open-minded and just gathering facts and then formulating an opinion, I think is important when you're dealing with people. I like to know what it is that motivates them, right? And just go about some questions around what excites them, what motivates them. And then just some basic questions around, have you ever experienced this, or have you ever experienced that? So, have them walk us through a project that they've been a part of, what they learned from the project, what their role was in the project. If they've done an internship, really asking them questions about the internship, what they learned from that. Analytical thinking is certainly something that I think is exceptionally beneficial to progress in your HR career. So being able to just think about a situation, analyze it, and come up with a theory. We're just looking to see that they've actually had some exposure, some job, right? Even working at Target or working at a restaurant, in a capacity like that, puts you in more of a lot of HR is customer service. Really, when you think about it, it's your customer service to a manager, or it's customer service to the employee in terms of making them, feel like they've been heard and, that they've been able to get a resolution. So I think what we look for, if you don't really have a lot of work history, is that you have some work history, whether that would be, and even someone potentially who's, maybe had a role and they've just been a babysitter. We're looking for somebody who demonstrates dependability. One of the things in HR is how you get along with people, right? And how you respond in a situation that may be tense. So, did you ever have a project where you didn't get along with the others on the team, and what did you do? So I think it's important, to be specific, right? And to give examples. A lot of times people will just kind of give you some vague answer. We're really looking for something specific in there that demonstrates what you really did learn, right? That you're able to articulate that. That's sometimes where you can really get the critical thinking. I think you have to have a really good understanding of what the position is, right? So what's in the job description. If you've had any conversations prior to that, usually you've talked to the recruiter. I think you need to really understand from the recruiter, what do they really want in the position? What are they really looking for? And you need to understand about the company and the company's culture. We're a pretty collaborative culture. So if you're not collaborative in nature, you're not used to more of a matrix sometimes, because we do projects. So you might not be working for your manager, you might be working for a project manager. So those are really important things. And if that was the case, that would shape how I would reply of how I'd be the best candidate for the job. If you know that the organization is very collaborative, then I think you'd say, I'd be a good candidate for this job because I like working in team environments. I excel working in team environments. I like that challenge of, being with a group and you'd phrase it around that. So I think the best way to answer that question, and I think just in general for anyone going in, if you really want the job, you really need to have done your homework up front as much as you can, and you can do a lot of that today with the internet. Maybe you've reached out to a few people on LinkedIn that work there and you've asked them some questions. It has to be sincere, because one of the things that a recruiter's looking for, or the hiring manager looking for, is that you're sincere and you're not just too polished, right? I don't think you have to be perfectly polished for a job interview. I think you have to be sincere, and you definitely have to demonstrate that you've done some homework on the company, that you're interested in the company, and why it's a good fit for you. You can get all that information from that first phone call with recruiter. Recruiters, that's how you know if somebody's really passionate about the company they work for, is when you talk to them. And if they can sit there and gush about their company, and you can hear it in their voice, then you kind of have an idea. When you go through and you're going through and you're just taking the classes, actually practicing what you're learning in terms of theory is a little bit different. You have to get comfortable making judgment calls when you don't have all the facts and you know you're not going to have all the facts. So I think part of it is, to be successful, you need to be curious. You need to be thoughtful and consider all the facts. You spend a lot of time talking to people. If you're a recruiter, you get really good at asking questions and trying to drive to figure out, is this the right candidate for the job? So it's some of those life skills that you need to apply that I think are important to be successful. I think you have to be comfortable that everyone's not always going to like you, because sometimes you have to make some hard decisions and some judgment calls. And some people aren't comfortable with that. So I think that that's another important piece. And then I think you have to be comfortable and curious to understand the business, really understand what your client, your managers need, so you can recommend the best solutions. You're going to come in some kind of HR, entry-level HR position. And sometimes you're going to come directly into one of the specific disciplines. So maybe you're going to start out in compensation, or you're going to start out in benefits, or you're going to start out in recruiting. And then from there, you could progress up in that particular discipline. Or you think that that's about the point after you've done 2 to 3 years where you can decide, okay, I want to try another discipline in HR. And maybe I started out in compensation and now I want to go to HRIS, or I started out in benefits and now I want to go to recruiting. And from there you can continue to do that and get more of a generalist background. And most business partners tend to have had more experience. They've been in different disciplines in HR, so they can touch on a little bit of everything. And then some people are very deep in a specialty. So maybe they started out in benefits and they became a senior benefits consultant and then the director of benefits. And potentially broader umbrella then would be over total rewards, which would potentially include benefits and compensation, a larger umbrella. And from there they may become the head of HR, the CHRO. I did that myself about 20 years ago now. So it does happen. And I think we see that with individuals that have gone back to graduate school. They've tried something out for 4 or 5 years. I've had at least 3 people that tried something out first, that decided they went back to graduate school and that they were going to get into HR. So I don't think it's uncommon. I think it's less common later in your career to get into HR. You'll find a lot of people who might independently just be recruiters, and they might have a specialty that they recruit for. And so that's something that they can do individually because they're really good at networking. I mean, maybe they were a cyber engineer and they've decided they don't want to do that anymore and they want to do recruiting. And so I think that that's something. Actually, I had seen something recently on LinkedIn around someone who was a lawyer and now he did recruiting. He recruited lawyers, he hired them, more like a headhunter. So I think that's definitely something you'd see. And obviously anything I think around the whole training, leadership development, coaching. There's a lot of executive coaches out there, and those can be people who are just independently doing that. We've hired a lot of people into HR, actually, that are more recent graduates. Some of them actually from graduate school, but we had one particular individual, and when we interviewed him, his background was very interesting. He had gone to school and was an accountant, had actually worked in a couple accounting firms for the first 5 years, and then decided he wanted to do something different. So the position we had open at the time was an HR representative, so being more of a generalist. But he had some really good, had a couple really good internships, and we could just see that he had a lot of potential. So he came into the HR representative role. He did well in the role, but it obviously wasn't his passion. He was very interested in more of the analytic piece, was great at putting reports together. and not so much the day-to-day interaction, maybe coaching a manager or working with an employee. So we had an opportunity, we had an opening in our HRIS group. He came to me and he said, I really think that that would be a better option. We just had a conversation of why he thought that that would be a better career path, and I was totally supportive of that. Employees can be afraid to have that conversation with their manager, but for me, with him, I look at it as if they're good at what they do and they have potential, then I'd like them to stay with the organization and find that right fit. So we just had dialogue back and forth, and he's taken that job and he's doing exceptionally well. He just really excels at it and much more creative. Now that he's kind of got that job, that seems to be a fit for him. Well, I definitely think, artificial intelligence somewhat impacts the whole recruiting spectrum, right? From the time I started, because I started in recruiting, there was nothing out there for me to go look. I wasn't going to be even necessarily using the internet, right? We were still, when I first started way back, we've still been a newspaper posting. So it's evolved a lot in terms of being able to find candidates and reach out to candidates. So I think that's a piece of it. The other piece is around the development, the kind of the learning and development of individual employees. In the past it's been, we'll send you to a training class or we'll have you do that. There's a lot of mobile technology out there today that allows for employees to do 10-minute snippets of learning that might help them develop in their career. So I think that those are things, and then a really big one is around data analytics. And being able to use that to help leaders really understand what their talent needs are and what the return on investment is from doing something. Just having opportunities. At my current employer, I've had a lot of opportunity to even just experiment outside of HR, learning the business and being able to try something new. Just by saying, by expressing I have an interest in doing more than my day-to-day job, then they've given me stretch assignments to be able to do that. I'm grateful for the opportunity to be able to try new things and to continue to learn. Well, I think I would have liked to have started HR first, right? I would have liked to have started that sooner than I did, so I could have done some internships potentially and had a few more years. But beyond that, it really would have just been maybe getting in there before I was in a relationship and kind of had that piece going on where I had a little bit more time to kind of explore it on my own ahead of time. Maybe I would have moved. There's some wonderful leadership development opportunities out there. By the time I went back to grad school, I had a child. So it's kind of like, I'm not gonna, do that rotation. So, my daughter was 2 years old when I went back to grad school, so. Well, I think, one was making that change, right? Because I technically had to take a step back some from a salary perspective when I wanted to get into HR, because they wanted me to start entry level. And so I think for me, just kind of taking that step, I think a lot of people want to make a lateral move, and in some cases you just can't. And so just kind of coming to the realization that if I did that, I would quickly rebound, and I did. And then I think, I've been at my current job for 16 years, so there's been some points in there where I've thought, okay, I've learned all I can learn, what's next? But that's where I've been, what else can I do, to just continue to keep learning, to stay active. So, I'm at a point right now where my current organization's not necessarily growing. And so my opportunities are either gonna be to leave or to relocate. So trying to figure out which one of those works best. It's a lot. My daughter's gonna be a freshman in the fall in high school. So I'm not sure moving her right now is the right option, although I'm really enjoying this project I'm on. So, just potentially starting to look at what are other opportunities out there and thinking through, do I want to do something slightly different, still in HR, but slightly different than what I've done for like the last 5 or 6. I was working on a project or I had a manager, I can't remember, it probably was a project for a manager who was pretty demanding. He was upset around something. And so I was talking with her, giving an update to our SVP of HR, and I apologized for something. He's like, don't ever apologize. He's like, when something like that's out of your control, just don't ever apologize. And he's like, sometimes women do that too much. And it was interesting because after he said that to me, I thought about it, and then I read a few things. You know, and women do tend to, at least that was what the articles implied, they do tend to ask more, I don't want to say politely, but they tend to put a little bit of that in there. And so I took that to heart. There's a time when you need to say, I messed up, versus a time when you just say it because it seems like the right thing to say. So I think that was pretty good. And then I used that with some of my earlier career folks as well. You tend to have a lot of, at least we do, a lot of women who do the business partner role. And I had one in particular, and she was always copying me on emails to managers, and she'd say, well, I'm like, you don't need to apologize, you haven't done anything. They're unhappy, that's not why you apologize. And just kind of that thought process in there, because you're trying to build respect and you want to influence. So I think just that, you know, everyone would have the opportunity to get an education and be able to do something that they, you know, they're able to support themselves, then they're happy and they feel that they're contributing.
What's your favorite food?
Ooh, my favorite food is probably cheese.
What's your favorite thing to do in your free time?
In my free time, exercise.
What's your favorite country to visit?
Well, I've only really been to one other one besides the United States. That's Italy. It was beautiful. I would definitely go back and visit some other parts of Italy.
What is one thing that you cannot live without?
Probably my phone.
What's your favorite book?
I don't know that I have just one.
Maybe genre? Do you have a favorite?
I think it's usually more like suspense or, you know, something like that. Something that's gonna keep me interested.
What's your favorite show or movie?
I don't know that I have a favorite one. I don't watch a lot of TV. Don't necessarily watch a lot of movies. So I know I'm boring, right? Well, if I had to say that, then I'd probably go back with 16 Candles, right? Very old movie, but I still think it's a great movie.
What makes you sad?
You know, seeing someone who is unhappy and has some control and just doesn't do anything with it, or can't do anything with it.
What makes you happy?
My daughter.
Can you finish this sentence? You should get into HR if you are
interested in variety in your day-to-day work.
You should not get into HR if you are.
If you like to do the same thing over and over again, if you want a repetition. So I think the important thing is if you love what you do, then every day going to work doesn't feel like work. So I think it's important that when you're exploring opportunities that you ask a lot of people and not be afraid to make a change. If you get started in one area and then you realize that, you know, I think I'm interested over here. If you can get up every day and go to work and not think about it as a chore, but something that gets you excited, then you've found the right thing to do.